the other day. As I looked in the mailbox, I became very excited because there was a magazine in the mailbox, and perhaps many of you received that magazine as well. On the front cover, there was a man. He was working with clay at a potter's wheel. It was a local magazine. And I thought, how timely that as I'm preparing for this sermon, that this magazine would show up in the mailbox of a man at a potter's wheel, working with the clay, shaping it. And then I turned on the inside and read his story. As I looked at the magazine cover, it made me begin to reminisce. One Christmas when I was a small girl, I received a toy potter's wheel, very similar to the one that is on the altar. But it was a little more authentic than this one. It wasn't made of plastic. And I would spend hours with the clay as it turned on the wheel, shaping it and moving it around, trying to make something that was useful, or at least beautiful. I wasn't very good at it, and so most of the time, the cup that I was trying to make became a little lopsided, or if I was trying to make a vase, it would fall apart. And so, but it didn't stop me from working with that clay. There's something exciting and amazing about working with that gray or that brown lump of clay and trying to take it from a nothingness state into a state where your creative thought of envisioning what can this be, and then beginning to use your hands to begin to shape that clay in various ways. Shaping it, molding it, carving it, maybe putting little dimples in it, and then firing it and painting it and turning it into something useful, something beautiful, and something maybe even precious, even if it's only precious to you. And when I used to look at that clay that I was working with, I always thought of the passage in Genesis where it talks about God shaping and molding human beings out of the dust of the earth. And I began to see how God could be a potter that shapes each of our lives in various ways. And as we celebrate this Labor Day weekend, just imagine for a moment in your mind, God bending over a potter's wheel with his hands fixed just so, or her hands fixed just so, around that clay with a vision in the mind and beginning to turn it into something unique, something beautiful, something special and useful. In our biblical narrative this morning, the prophet Jeremiah is told to go down to the potter's house, down in the valley of Hinnom, located in the southern part of Jerusalem. And in those days, Jeremiah went to the section that was called Potsheth Gate. And there he was told that he would receive a message from God. God would talk to him at the potter's house. And so Jeremiah is obedient and goes there. And Jeremiah receives at this potter's house life lessons. Lessons that perhaps we all could benefit from. And as Jeremiah arrives, he sees the potter at work. Jeremiah sees the hands of the potter around the clay as it turns round and round. The clay begins to take its shape. Perhaps it's going to be a cup that will eventually hold refreshing, cool water for a thirsty soul. Or maybe it's going to be a bowl or a dish that's going to hold some warm stew that will nourish a hungry body. Or maybe, perhaps, as the designer is imagining it, maybe this piece is going to be a beautiful vase that will hold an array of beautiful flowers just like we have on the altar this morning. Or maybe it's going to be a wonderful decorative piece that someone can hang on the wall. No matter what, that piece of clay is taking shape in the potter's hands. And Jeremiah perhaps began to imagine in his own mind, as this message is unfolding from God, that God is the potter and we are the clay. And whatever God is shaping in us and molding in us is God's vision for us. And the potter begins to continue to work. And as Jeremiah is standing there watching this potter labor over this clay, Jeremiah suddenly sees that the potter has stopped working. His hands has come off of the clay. And he ceased working with the clay. Something has gone wrong. Something has gone very wrong with the clay. And Jeremiah learns his first lesson. The clay has become marred, spoiled, imperfect. But what caused it to become imperfect? How does clay in the potter's hand become imperfect? Certainly in this passage, we cannot blame God for it becoming imperfect. And so we have to look for other clues as to why it became imperfect. I had a pastor one day. He was the senior pastor and I was the associate pastor. And he told a story about his daughter. And at the time that he was talking about, the daughter was 4 or 5 years old. And the father, Jim, was at home with his 4 or 5-year-old daughter alone with her. Now that ought to give you a clue of what trouble he's about to be in. And he's telling her all day long various things in which he should do. Now, honey, pick up your toys and don't leave them all scattered around the place for people to trip over. Honey, go back to the table and sit down and eat your lunch and finish it. Drink your milk, he would say. Clean up the mess that you've made on the table. Now it's time to take your nap. And on Jim would be giving her instructions about what she should be doing during the course of the day. And he goes on to say that at some point his little daughter had gotten fed up with him telling her what to do. And so he gave that final instruction, perhaps the instruction that broke the camel's back for her. And he said, now honey, it's time for you to get ready to do this. And she put her hands on her hips and she looked at her dad and she shook her finger at him and she said, you're not the boss of me. But how many times do we say that to God? You're not the boss of me. We think we are in control. We think that a lot of times we have our own way, our own plans. And we're shaping our own lives. And we're shaping what we want to be. But in reality, we are the clay. And God is the potter. And as we look at this particular text, there was a young woman, I read her book, and her book was talking about this particular passage. And she says, no matter what political situations we would find ourselves in, no matter what kinds of corporate situations we might find ourselves in, in, or social or family structures we may find ourselves in, believing that we're in control, God is still the potter, shaping us and molding us. But some of us might get a little concerned about the thought that God is the one that's shaping us and molding us. And we might think to ourselves, I don't want to be under anybody's control. I want to be in control. And I know for myself how freaked out I get when someone is trying to control me. I have a knee-jerk reaction to that. And most of us do too. But the reality is, we were created by God. We were shaped by God. We were molded by God. But we are not robots. We are not silly putty in the hand of God, nor are we puppets in God's hands. God created us with fine minds, and God expects us to use them. God gave us free choice, free will. We are people who can choose, and we can choose whether to cooperate with God or not to cooperate